This is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of FI Investment Group, and your host of Washington Calling, where we interview leading voices from business and politics that impact you, the viewer. Today, we're fortunate to have a distinguished guest, Ambassador Bhatia. Welcome to our show, Mr. Ambassador. It's nice to see you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and privilege to be with you today.
Mr. Ambassador, please tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and your service in the Indian Foreign Service for our global audience.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and privilege to be with you here on this very special program. I have spent 36 years serving the nation in the Indian diplomatic service. I retired about 9 years back. So I have become very active in the strategic community of India, and I also write often for the media. So in a way, diplomat, scholar, and journalist. It's been a great run so far, and I'm so happy to be here with you, Islam.
Mr. Ambassador, you have had a distinguished career in the Indian Foreign Service. What's your thoughts about the rating the Indian Foreign Service with other foreign services, and especially the fact that the Indian Foreign Service, as the people say, needs some kind of reform, and there's a lack of understanding of international matters for the Indian Foreign Officer? What's your thought on that?
So as I was trying to essentially convey to you, having been a member of the Indian Foreign Service, it's somewhat difficult for me to be very objective on this, but since now I speak as a scholar and not for the government of India, I can be as candid as possible. First of all, I do regard the Indian Foreign Service as one of the best diplomatic services in the world. It is one of the smallest, by the way. I think
Yes.
in all diplomatic officers, we are barely 1,100. Whereas, for example, China has over 7,000 members of their diplomatic team. So it shows, first of all, that even with limited resources, Indian diplomatic team has been able to achieve much. This is not to say that it is perfect by any stretch. It is not. Essentially, the training part has been very good in the past few decades. In fact, when I served in the service, I felt that the training was a big weapon that helped us. Now, the most important thing is that in the last few years, last decade or so, India's global role has expanded tremendously. And so Indian diplomatic service has a huge role to play. I think we need to get more resources. We need to focus even more on training, and we have to be totally up to date with regard to world affairs. Then we can do even better.
Very nice. As I understand, you were posted as ambassador to Mexico, which is a part of Latin America and also part of North America. What's the difference in posting in Americas to those in Africa and Asia? Tell us a little bit about that. Can you shed some light on it?
Yes, in fact, I was privileged to serve both north and south of US. I served as Consul General in Toronto and later as to Mexico. So I have a good idea of North America, but from outside the US. I would say that normal rule is that the farther you go away from your home country, the less seriously you are taken as a diplomat. But in this case, both Canada and Mexico, they did not give me that treatment. My view was that Canada, because of very strong Indian diasporic connection there, and Mexico, because of the long historical affinity between India and Mexico and the cultural affinity, I felt very much at home. I enjoyed the posting there. And we were able to enlist the support of the Indian communities in both countries in order to strengthen and deepen cooperation between India and Canada on one side and India and Mexico on the other side. How is that different from Asia? I think I can say that obviously, in Asian capitals, you feel much more at home, whereas in Toronto and Mexico City, you know that you are in a foreign land which has its own affinities with India.
Well, Canada is a pretty nice country. My wife, Debbie, was born in Canada, and their great-great-grandfather came from Holland. And so I have a very much of what I consider, I love Canada, and I live in the United States all my life. So you should not be you should feel at home in our country. We consider ourselves to the best. So let's talk a little bit about the fact that you are very much involved in promoting what I call a transnational activities. Tell us that, Mr. Ambassador, what benefits that India derives from this kind of engagement, and why India should be involved with this kind of activities.
Right. On transnational connectivity, this is a very vast subject. This is a subject of great topical interest for India, where I'm speaking to you from, and South Asia, and also Southeast Asia. Here, the concept is that many of these countries have functioned for long, developing on their own, but in the 21st century, in a way, Asia is wandering and striving and working for what is called Asian century. Asian century demands connectivity, which is not just roads and bridges. It is connectivity certainly of infrastructure in terms of roads and bridges, but also in terms of maritime and civil aviation linkages. So the more flights there are, more shipping services are there, then countries within South Asia and South Asia would be able to feel much better connected. And on top of that, we are also talking of connectivity involving institutions, human beings, and above all, ideas. In this context, permit me to mention one of the recent publications we produced, which is on BIMSTEC. This is a sub-regional body here, as you know.
Oh, okay.
Your
Yes.
viewers would know 5 countries of South Asia and 2 countries of Southeast Asia. A lot of connectivity projects are taking place, and we are hoping that on our own, in the next few years, we would be able to feel much better connected with each other.
Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned a minute ago that you have served many years in Africa, and you see, how do you see the rise of the Africa and the importance of the Indian diaspora in Africa? Do you think the Indian diaspora in Africa have the capacity, capability, character, and conscience to make a difference?
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Islam, for asking about Africa. This is a passion with me. I spent a number of years there. I was India's High Commissioner in Kenya, and then later High Commissioner in South Africa. I'm passionate about Africa because I've seen Africa changing in the last 2 to 3 decades. There is more democracy, there is more peace, there is greater prosperity. In a way, the African Renaissance is becoming a reality. This is again not to say that Africa has managed to solve all its problems. Far from it. There is still disease, there is still poverty, there is still inequality, there is also bad governance and corruption. But in contrast to, say, 30 years back, today we can logically say, convincingly say, that Africa is on the road of growth and on a trajectory of prosperity. So in that context, what is interesting is that the whole world has become interested in Africa. Well, maybe not the whole world, but a number of major countries have become interested. India is one of them, and India is trying very hard to deepen its cooperation in terms of trade, investment, diplomacy, culture, education, etc. So in that context, your second part of the question, which is about the Indian diaspora, becomes very relevant. I think, of the total global population of about 15, 16 million people in the Indian diaspora, approximately 3 million live in Africa. They have been our great partners and allies. And I can assure you on the basis of practical experience that both in Kenya and in South Africa, we developed good linkages, and they were our partners in strengthening India's relations with those African countries.
As you know, Mr. Ambassador, China is rising. And I say to the people, China has already risen. As Henry Kissinger just told me last week when I had a meeting with him, China is already risen, it's not rising. And what about the impact of the China in Africa? And also, how do the China's presence in the Asia will affect India and South Asia? I wanted you to
agree with
both.
Yes, I agree with you. China has indeed risen and is still rising. China's rise is a major reality in the world. And we are seeing particularly in our part of the world, in South Asia and Southeast Asia, what is now called fashionably the Indo-Pacific region. And we are also seeing very much this in Africa. I have a scholar's dispassionate view on China's presence in Africa. I think China has to pursue its own interests. We cannot fault China for that. And it is for other countries such as India to pursue their own interests as well. Now, what China has done, initially, I think there were a lot of flaws in their strategy. They were trying to really focus just on a few sectors. But now they have a broader strategy, and this came out very clearly when the China-Africa Forum conference took place in Beijing just a few days back. They are focusing very much on infrastructure, on human resource development, on trade and investment, and also on technology and industrial services as well. The point is that there are people in the West and people, I think, in India and other parts of Asia, which feel that China has a kind of a exploitative approach under which China would take the resources and the minerals and petroleum products from Africa and supply manufactured items. But I think this is a binary view. I think it is, the reality is much more complicated. All I can say, talking a little bit about the wider picture, that the way to compete with China is not to denigrate it, but to improve one's own performance. And this is where countries such as, members of the European community, India, Japan, other Asian countries interested in developing relationship with Africa come in. We are doing a lot of collaboration. For example, you would have heard of India-Japan cooperation in Africa to rise or expand its footprint. So this is a good thing. Africa wants everybody. Africa is not making a choice between India and China. It wants India and China.
I wanted to shift the gears and talk a little bit about the China and Pakistan economic corridor, which is really at the next stage. What does it have impact on Asia, especially to India and South Asia?
Yes. Now, China-Pakistan economic corridor forms part of the wider Belt and Road Initiative of China. We have had a great deal of attention focused on the China-Pakistan economic corridor. India has strong reservations to this particular project because a part of this passes through the territory which belongs to India. I'm referring to the part of Kashmir which is under the present occupation of Pakistan. So there is the question of the challenge to India's territorial integrity and sovereignty, and that is a very sensitive political question, as you can easily appreciate. But more importantly, there are scholars and experts who feel that the dependence of Pakistan on the Chinese largesse is not in the interest of Pakistan itself. Now you may say, who are you to comment on Pakistan's interest? But I want to assure you that now there are very strong voices coming from Pakistan, including from the Pakistani establishment, which reflect concern and anxiety about certain negative aspects of the China-Pakistan corridor. We don't have to go into detail, but all that I can say is that the new government of Pakistan, it seems, is going to look at this somewhat carefully. As far as we are concerned, we are not enthusiastic about it. We are opposed to it.
Okay. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about, I know you work with the think tanks, and the think tanks play a very important role in shaping United States foreign policy, and they have a lot of influence in policy making, and they mobilize expertise, they put forward evidence, they push for innovative change, and they build a network and communities, and they offer like all kinds of policy ideas. What's your thoughts on the role of the think tank in shaping India's foreign policy?
First of all, I agree with you when you talked about think tanks and their role in the US. I would say that in a way, India is following in the footsteps of the US. I think if we look at the developments of the last decade, the number of Indian think tanks has proliferated, and the quantum of their activities has also expanded. I earlier was the head of a prestigious think tank named Indian Council of World Affairs, which was supported by the Ministry of External Affairs. I'm now serving a private sector think tank named Gateway House, located in Mumbai. And I can say with positive experience that think tanks today are doing wonderful service in terms of educating the public opinion, in terms of influencing policymakers, in terms of empowering the business and industry. I wanted very quickly to show you one more publication, which is on blue economy. This was also produced by us in order to show that all the stakeholders in society are getting the benefit of the collective wisdom of think tanks.
I wanted to talk about another topic which is near and dear to me, and I'm sure it is near and dear to you. How can the India diaspora help India achieve its fullest potential? As you know, the India diaspora can tap upon India's vast human resources. They can help in innovations, entrepreneurship, and provide some money for the startup company, and they can also help in commerce, trade, investment, and create companies. What's your thoughts?
Thank you very much for asking this question. Yes, indeed, it is very close to my heart as well. In most of the countries where I serve, I had the honor to serve very large sections of Indian diaspora, and this is one very common bond running through the 9 postings. I think the role of Indian diaspora has changed over the decades. I think it is honest to say that when India's stock was low, globally, so to say, I'm talking of the political stock, diaspora found difficult to connect with India. But that is all changed. India's stock globally is very high. And what is important is that India has given every possible indication to be better connected with the diaspora around the world. Now, how can the diaspora help India? I think it is a two-way street. First of all, India has to constantly give the impression, real impression, that we need the diaspora. I think Madame Sushma Swaraj, the External Affairs Minister of India, has done a pioneering role in that. She has felt very well connected with the diaspora through social media. On the other side, I think the diaspora speaks first of all through the remittances. $75 billion every year that is coming into India. It's a very major contribution of the diaspora.
Yes.
But more importantly, every time India's top leaders go abroad, President, Prime Minister, Vice President, an interaction or a dialogue with diaspora is an integral part of their VVIP program. So now, as you rightly hinted, diaspora can come forward, help to modernize India in every possible manner, take part in the flagship schemes and projects of the government, and help in accelerating the social and economic reform of the country. I can't be specific on this, except to say we want the diaspora and we are here to serve the diaspora.
Very well said, Mr. Ambassador. Also, the fact that I am the founding member of the India Diaspora in the United States. One of the things that we're doing for the India Diaspora is to help them with the philanthropic engagement with India. And the power of the purpose of philanthropy is very important. It's not just putting your name on some kind of temples or mosque or church, but also making a difference, and they can help achieve India's fullest potential in commerce, trade, investment, and people-to-people engagement. As a result of that, I personally have given several $1 million to Aligarh Muslim University to establish Frank and Debbie Islam Management Complex, which I thought was very important because I would not be here today if I have not received the education at Aligarh Muslim University. So I owe a sense of gratitude to them. So, and this is the kind of things we're doing. As a matter of fact, we're going to Canada in 3 weeks through the India Diaspora delegation to talk about in terms of the purpose of philanthropy and what they can do to help achieve India's fullest potential. So I want to express my deep... Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Ambassador.
Yeah, I want to express my deep appreciation for who you are and for what you stand. I know about the connection to Azamgarh, which
oh my gosh,
comes,
yes, I was born there.
In a state which is my state, Uttar Pradesh. So while we should not sound tribal here, the fact is that we are very proud of personalities like you who have started with so little and has achieved so much. And I congratulate you and the environment in America, which made your American dream possible.
I agree that I embody the American dream. There's several other things we do, and we can talk offline. My foundation also helps the Indian journalists to come to America at the Missouri School of Journalism to get to know America and its values, freedom of press, and so on and so forth. So that's important to us. And so we will end our conversation. We want to thank you for being here, and thanks to the audience. This is Frank Islam wishing you a great week.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure.
You're most welcome.